Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to America is in the Heart, A Personal History by Carlos Bulosan, Part 2, Chapter 22. The primitive beauty of Santa Fe reminded me of the calm and isolation of Baguio, the mountain city in Luzon where I had worked for Miss Mary Stradon. Morning was like a rose cupping its trembling dews, shattering and delicate, small but potent with miracles. But the nights were tranquil with millions of stars. When I looked out the window of my room, I felt as though I were thrown back into a familiar scene of childhood. Far away in the desert, I could see buzzards circling in the sky, waiting for the carcass of a dying coyote. And frightened little birds ran into the bushes to hide and came out when the danger was over and the sky was clear again. But I did not know what to do away from my people. When I was alone, sitting in my room, I would think of going back to California, to the violent life I knew. Then I received a letter from my brother Amado, who was serving a jail sentence in Santa Barbara. It was my opportunity to run away from the solitude and loneliness that wrapped me and stifled my desire to live. I took a bus to California. I stopped in Los Angeles for a lawyer. I was disappointed when I found that there were no Filipino lawyers. I called my brother Macario, but he informed me that Filipinos could not practice law in the state. I was angry and bewildered, but I left immediately for Santa Barbara. I found an American lawyer who promised to reopen my brother's case, paid him $250, and looked for a job. The lawyer, of course, did his best, but Amado stayed in jail for 6 months. It seemed that he had been implicated in a robbery in Lompok, but he swore he had nothing to do with it. I felt that I should stay near Amado. I found work at an ice plant, but it was too strenuous for me. I lifted a block of ice almost twice my weight into a wheelbarrow and pushed it to a truck outside the plant. My hands became brittle and dead with cold, but I stayed on for 5 weeks. On weekends, when I visited my brother, I bought chop suey and Filipino dishes with the money I earned at the ice plant. I still do not understand why I almost killed myself working for Amado when he had free board and room. In reality, he was enjoying life, for outside where I was living there was cold and hunger. But perhaps it was because of my belief that it was dishonorable to be in jail. Amado might come out, but the stigma would cling to him and ruin his life. Yet, looking back now, I can see that his life was already ruined, and I know that all my efforts to rehabilitate him were futile. Sometime afterward, when Amado came out of jail, I found work in a milk company. It was lighter work because the cans weighed only 25 pounds and it was easy for me to carry them into the trucks. But it was night work and it was cold when I started washing and filling the cans at 1 o'clock in the morning. When the truck drivers came at about 4, I washed the floor and put the empty cans in order. I went to my room about 7 after I had cleaned the cans, when the drivers came back to take over the plant. I thought I had lost interest in everything. But here I was again, working industriously as before, hoping to survive another winter. It was a planless life, hopeless and without direction. I was merely living from day to day. Yesterday seemed long ago and tomorrow was too far away. It was today that I lived for aimlessly, this hour, this moment. It gave me an acute sense of time that has remained with me. When Amado came out of jail, I told him that he should go to work, and he did. He was an excellent cook, It was the only trade he learned in America. I noticed some months afterward that he was losing interest in his work. I gave him my money to start a business. He bought a restaurant down the block near where I was working and renovated it. I helped him when I was not working at the milk factory, and when he needed money for additional equipment, I gave it to him. I felt confident that he would succeed in this new life. The restaurant prospered, and Amado, exhilarated by his new prosperity, leased the building above the restaurant. It was an old two-story building that belonged to an Italian woman. In a little while, Amado's old friend, who had scattered when he was in jail, began coming to his place. They helped him in the kitchen and at the counter, but they also slept in the hotel. Slowly and gradually, they came, and soon the place was full of them, depriving the farm workers of hotel accommodations when they were in town. But I was learning something vital from Amado. What mattered to him was the pleasure he had with his friends. There was something urgent in their friendship, probably a defense against their environment. They created a wall around themselves and their little world, and what they did behind it was theirs alone. Their secrecy bordered on insanity. It was something I did not want to be part of, but was not strong enough to escape from. Then Amado was forced to close the restaurant and to give up the hotel. The milk factory discharged me. It was a dark year. There were many unemployed men in the streets, ready to work for almost nothing. I gave up my room and went to the Mexican district. Amado went to Chinatown. One night, after several weeks of isolation, I went to a Chinese gambling house on Cañon Perdido Street. I was asking the gamblers about my brother when I saw Alfredo coming through the door with a wide smile. "You look hungry, Carlos," he said. "Yes, I am hungry," I said. "Well, you won't be in a few minutes," he said, taking my arm. I followed him to a chop suey house across the street where he ordered enough food to feed 4 hungry men. I ate silently, watching the widening grin in his face. "Open your eyes, Carlos," he said, showing me the fat roll of bills in his hand. "This is a country of survival of the fittest. Quit sleeping on top of pool tables. There is plenty of money around. Here!" I reached for the money in his hand. "Where did you get it?" I asked, not understanding what he was driving at. "You have enough to feed this town." "Where did I get it?" He laughed. "I found a Mexican girl picking peas in Arroyo Grande. Then, my friend, I bought some nice clothes for her. When I was convinced that I had her, I borrowed a car and took her to the Pinoy camps in Santa Maria Valley. She was beautiful. The boys were crazy about her." I wanted to stab him with the fork in my hand, but I was hungry and there was no place to stay. I was beginning to cough at night. "I am sick, Alfredo," I said. "Please leave me alone. Now!" "I'll be seeing you around," he said. But I did not see him again. He disappeared with another girl and never came back. It was only some years afterward that I began to have some understanding of his life, but he had already been deported to the Philippines. He became a playboy among the rich women in Manila, a gambler among the politicians, and a gangster in the provinces. When Alfredo disappeared from Santa Barbara, Amado became restless and unhappy. He left for Los Angeles, where he told me he would look for a job. He found one in a downtown hotel, cooking for visiting businessmen and retired gamblers. Happy for the first time, he told me that he would save his money and start another business. I stayed on in Santa Barbara, hoping the farmers in Goleta, a town 10 miles to the north, would need hands for the carrot season. But there was no price, and the farmers plowed their crops under. The gambling houses closed because most of the Filipinos were out of work and the Chinese who operated them gambled among themselves. Later, I found work in Solvang, farther north, picking flowers and seeds for a big company that supplied these to the nation. But the pay was only 10 cents an hour, and what I earned in a week's time was scarcely enough to pay for the gloves I used to keep my hands from the cold. I was enchanted by these flower fields and the kind, tall, blue-eyed Danish farmers in the valley, so that I felt like crying when I left for Bulosan. Here, in this highway town, I washed dishes in a large hotel where rich tourists stopped for a rest. I slept under the peach trees in the yard when my work was over. Once, the proprietor, a Frenchman, who spent more time drinking than attending to his business, sat beside me and began crying. "It's the sound of home, boy," he sobbed. "I'm lonely for the sound of home." "This is your home, sir," I said. "No, my boy," he said. "Home is where my heart lives. Home is in the blue hills of Normandy." This man, I said to myself, who came to America as a young boy and made a fortune and married a beautiful white woman, is lonely for the bluest hills of his childhood. "Go home, my boy," he said. "Home to your islands before it is too late." Then he started talking rapidly in French, gesticulating and laughing. He jumped to his feet and began dancing what must have been a folk dance of the farmers in those blue hills in Normandy. There were tears of joy in his eyes. Then he stopped and went into the hotel. The sound of home. Would I also someday yearn for the sound of home? Would I also cry for the sad songs of the peasants in Mangusmana? And before I realized it, I began talking in our dialect. "Ama, ina, manong, ading, sikayo." The sound of home. Home among the peasants in Mangusmana. Across the street, working in a grocery store, was a young girl who fascinated me. She was my size, with brown hair and blue eyes. I would go to the store pretending to buy something, but I wanted only to look at her. The way she moved around the room, the grace of her arms, the smile on her face. But when she asked me what I wanted, I felt embarrassed and fumbled for something to say. "Oh, you don't understand English well?" she asked. "No, ma'am," I said. "Oh, don't ma'am me," she said kindly. "I'm just a young girl, see? My name is Judith. I have some books. You'd like to read, perhaps?" "Yes, Judith," I said. "Follow me," she said, smiling. I followed her through the back door and up into a house. I followed her slowly, drinking in her grace, the lovely way she moved her body. In the living room, piled along the wall, were books of many sizes and colors. Books! I was enchanted when I saw them. They drew me irresistibly to them. "Maybe you would like this one," Judith said. "It's called The Lad That Failed." "What is it about?" I asked. "Well, it is the story of a painter who went blind," she said. "And there is a beautiful girl in it too. Shall I read something to you?" "All right," I said. And she started reading the story of a painter in another land who went blind. When my dishes were done, working faster, I ran to the store so that Judith could read to me. Oh, the sound of her voice! But one day, when a Filipino and a white woman came to the restaurant to eat and were refused, I flung my apron away and attacked the head waiter with my fists. The son of the proprietor, who had come home from a university for vacation, came running with words of anger. "You are fired!" These same stabbing words that followed me everywhere. "You are fired!" All right. I packed my things and went to the grocery store to say goodbye to Judith. If only you could stay on in this town, she said. I'll come back someday, I said. Goodbye. There was something lost and far away in her voice. She raised her arm and turned away. I went to the door and out into the sunlight. Chapter 23. I tried hard to remain aloof from the destruction and decay around me. I wanted to remain pure within myself. But in Pismo Beach, where I found Mariano, I could not fight anymore. He and I slept on the floor of a small cottage where two others were living. It was used by prostitutes when summer came and the farm workers were in town with money. When our companions woke up in the morning, Mariano and I rushed to the small bed and slept all day, waking up only at night when the gambling houses opened. I would walk among the gamblers hoping they would give me a few coins when they won. Throughout the winter and far into spring, I lived in this cabin with my companions. When I was hungry, I went to the chop suey house in our block. I would sit with gamblers, and when the waiter came with a pot of hot tea and rice cakes, I would drink 4 or 5 cups and put the cakes in my pockets. Then my hunger was appeased, and I could talk again. I almost lost my power of speech, because when I was hungry, the words would not come. When I tried to speak, only tears flowed from my eyes. One night, when the Korean woman who owned the restaurant saw me looking hungrily at some half-emptied plates left by white customers, she said, "When you are hungry, come here and eat. This is your home." When I went to the kitchen to wash dishes to pay for my food, the woman threw her hands up and said, "That is enough! Go home! Come again!" I went again and again, but I had no home that winter. One of my companions died of tuberculosis, so Mariano burned the cabin and left town. The nights were cold. Once in a while I could hear church bells ringing, and I would say to myself, "If you can listen long enough to those bells, you will be safe. Try to listen again and be patient." They were my only consolation, those bells. And I listened patiently, and that spring came with a green hope. I went to Seattle to wait for the fishing season in Alaska. There seemed no other place in this wide land to go. There seemed to be tragedy and horror everywhere I went. Where would I go from here? What year was it when I had landed in Seattle with a bright dream? I was walking on Jackson Street when I suddenly came upon Julio, who had disappeared in Sunnyside after the riot in Moxie City. I went with Julio to a Japanese gambling house on King Street, where he taught me how to play a game called Pai Q. I watched him play, learning his tricks. Before the gambling houses opened, we sat in his room for hours playing Pai Q. Julio was very patient and kind. "Gambling is an art," he said to me. "Some people gamble because they think there is money in it. Yes, there is money in it when you are lucky, but then the meaning of gambling is distorted, no longer an art. You could win $10 a day all your life, and making an art of gambling if you would only try. I am an artist." When Julio had perfected the art of gambling, he turned to picking pockets. I watched him practicing for hours. He would put a silver dollar on the edge of the table and walk toward it, snatching the dollar swiftly as he passed. Then he would use a 50-cent piece, a quarter, and finally a dime. When he could snatch a 10-cent piece without dropping it, he mingled among the people in the streets and practiced a new art. I followed him. How swift and nimble he was. Once in a department store, he was almost caught. I hurried past him, whispering in my dialect that he was being watched. His room was filled with inexpensive trinkets. "Why don't you sell it and use the money for something good?" I said. "You are distorting the art of picking pockets again," he said. "My pickings are works of art. I use them for artistic expression only." His pickings were neatly arranged on the table, on the floor, and some of the cheap wrist watches were hanging on the bedposts. I thought I had understood Julio when we walked across the Rattlesnake Mountains, but I was wrong. He was again a new personality, shaped by a new environment. I felt that I should leave him. I was angry that the old Julio was lost, for he had given me something, a kind of philosophy which had sustained me for a long time. "I'm going away," I said. "I want to work, anything but gambling or picking pockets." "You are a damn fool!" he shouted. Then suddenly realizing that he had made a mistake, he said, "There is no work anywhere. Why don't you go to the gambling houses and wait for the hop picking in Spokane?" It seemed a good idea. I went to a Chinese gambling house and started playing at the pie cue table. At night, when the place was crowded, I stopped playing and sat by a table. I noticed a Filipino farm worker, an elderly man, who was playing heavily at one of the tables. He left when he had lost all his money. Then he came back with a gun and began shooting at the Chinese dealers. There was a general scramble, and I ducked behind a table that had fallen on the floor. I was terrified, but managed to gather a handful of bills, crept to the back door, and rolled down the stairs. I ran frantically to the street in front of the gambling house. The Filipino had gone completely crazy. He was running up and down the sidewalk with a long knife, stabbing everyone in his way. The people ran for their lives. But for some, it was too late. He had killed 8 and wounded 16 before the policemen got him. I lost track of Julio, but I was glad when I took the freight train for Portland of the things he had taught me before he disappeared. Word of the incident in Seattle had reached Portland before I arrived, and all the gambling houses were closed. I took another train to Sacramento, where a Filipino mass meeting was being held. I skirted the crowd and took a bus for San Bernardino, where Chinese gambling houses were open to Filipinos. I lost almost all my money. I stayed on for another day, but on the 4th day, I gave up hope. I had only 15 cents left. At night, when the gambling houses closed, I went to a Filipino pool room and slept on a pool table, which was warmer and softer than the hard benches along the walls. But it was not the first time, for I had slept on pool tables in Santa Barbara before Alfredo had appeared with plenty of money. The next morning, desperate and hungry, I sat in front of a gambling house, hoping to try my luck with my 15 cents when the place opened. I did not go in right away, but killed time talking to the other gamblers. 3 hours before closing time, I started playing and went on until the place was closed. It was jubilant. I had won nearly $500. Now, I said to myself, this is the life for me in America. I took the bus for Los Angeles. No more freight trains for me. They were only for hobos. I called up my brother Macario from the station, but he had left his job. I did not know where Amado lived, so I took a train for San Diego, hoping to gamble there for a week. It was twilight when I arrived in San Diego. I rented a room at the U.S. Grant Hotel. It was a new life. No more sleeping in pool rooms and going hungry. No more fear of want. It was Sunday, and the gambling houses were closed until Monday. I took a ferry boat to Coronado, a small island off the bay. When I returned to the ferry station, the boats had stopped running for the night. I walked back to town and tried to get a room, but all the hotels refused me. I went to the ferry station and slept on a bench. The following morning, I took a streetcar to Coronado where, in a drugstore fountain, I was refused service. One young girl who was a student told me that there was a Filipino clubhouse on the island. I went to the clubhouse. Frank opened the door and it was a happy reunion. I thought that he had gone to Chicago when we parted in Utah. He was now a photographer. He was living with 15 other Filipinos, mostly hotel and restaurant helpers. He took me to the kitchen where some of the men were playing Pai Q. I took my place by the table, pulling my hat down over my face. I wanted to win their money. It did not matter to me whether they were laboring men or not. I had to play with them and cheat them when I had the chance. Cheating was an imperative of the game. The men went to work reluctantly, one at a time, and came hurrying back to the table, throwing their wages on it. I cheated them flagrantly because they were poor players, laughing aloud and kidding them while I won. But I was afraid of this bunch of work-worn, fear-stricken men. I knew that they were capable of violence, unlike professional gamblers who, upon discovering that you are one of them, lose a few more dollars and leave the table. I had discovered that there was fraternity among professional gamblers. When one was destitute, others are ready to give him a hand. In the afternoon, when all the men came back, I won all their money. They became quarrelsome. Frank told me that one of the men had a wife who was in a hospital, but the man was shy and full of pride, and I knew I could not do anything for him. Why did he gamble his money when his wife needed it? Did he think he had the right to marry when he was scrubbing floors for $35 a month? To hell with him! So I was becoming hard and brutal too, and careless with my talk. I went to San Diego and played in Chinatown, but I could not forget the man whose wife was in a hospital. I kept seeing his face on the gaming table, forlorn and pitiful. I played without direction, angry with myself, and I began to lose. The next morning, I went to Coronado. On my way to the Filipino clubhouse, I bought $50 worth of groceries for the men. They were all in when I arrived. Some were dancing with their girls, and a man was playing a guitar. I gave the groceries to Frank and went out to buy some whiskey. When I returned, Frank was cooking a meal. The men started playing Pai Q in the kitchen. I sat at the table and purposely lost $100. The remainder of the money I had won from them. I stopped playing and joined the dancers in the living room. A young Mexican girl dragged me to the floor. I began dancing with her, feeling the warmth of her body close to mine. "My name is Carmen," she said. "What is yours?" I told her. "Let's go to my room," she whispered. "All right." The blood was pounding in my temple. "I will follow you." Her lips were hot upon mine when Frank came into the room, stopped at the door, then sat weakly on the bed. "This is my room," he said. "We have very little memories in America," he said, looking at the girl with sad eyes. He crossed the room and opened a drawer, bringing out a girl's diaphanous gown. "I got this for a girl years ago. I promised to keep it for her always, but she said that if I ever found one I could like." He looked at Carmen sadly. "It would be all right with her. Will you try it on, Carmen?" Gentle and loving he was, helping Carmen on with the gown, kneeling on the floor around her and soothing it to her body. Then it came to me that I would never again hurt Frank or Carmen, that if I felt like hurting someone, it would be those men and women who had driven Frank to the floor, kneeling by an unfaithful girl. I left the room quietly. I stayed on in San Diego and gambled. When I had a stroke of luck, I transferred to the El Cortez Hotel. I sent a postal money order to myself and went to San Francisco, but the city was dead. The gambling houses were closed. I stayed in Chinatown and walked up and down Market Street. Once, in a cheap rooming house, I met a Filipino who was struggling to become an artist. I gave him some money and left for Stockton. It was again the asparagus season, and the farm workers were itching to lose their money. But I hated to gamble in the Chinese houses. I went to Walnut Grove, 30 miles away, where the Japanese controlled the gambling. I stopped playing when I had only $5 left. At noon the following day, I played again and made $25. I went to Stockton hoping to find Claro, but his restaurant was closed. I became restless and went to the bus station and bought a ticket to San Luis Obispo. I felt that it was the end of another period of my life. I could see it in my reaction to the passing landscape and my compassion for the workers in the fields. It was the end of a strange flight. I bought a bottle of wine when I arrived in San Luis Obispo. I rented a room in a Japanese hotel and started a letter to my brother Macario, whose address had been given to me by a friend. Then it came to me like a revelation that I could actually write understandable English. I was seized with happiness. I wrote slowly and boldly, drinking the wine when I stopped, laughing silently and crying. When the long letter was finished, a letter which was actually a story of my life, I jumped to my feet and shouted through my tears, "They can't silence me anymore! I'll tell the world what they have done to me!" Chapter 24. I went to bed resolved to change the whole course of my life forever. Where was I to begin? Where did rootless men begin their lives? Who were the men that contributed something positive to society? Show me the books about them. I would read them all. I would educate myself to be like them. In the morning, rising to the clouds with my dream, I walked out of the hotel a new man. My first impulse was to walk past the house where Max's wife lived. I had seen it only once years ago, and I had a difficult time locating it. I remembered Max running toward me with a gun in his hand. I stopped when the memory of that day became too vivid in my imagination. At last, I found the house. It was a small house with a wide yard. I went to the door and knocked, not really knowing why. The door opened and a tall, thin, white woman with gray hair showed her face. "Good morning, ma'am," I said, wondering if she were Max's wife. "Come in. Come on in," she said quickly. I followed her into the living room, sat on a couch, and fumbled for my hat. This was a new experience. Who was she? I saw a bedroom door. That must be the place where Max shot the white man, I thought. I edged toward the door. My life of fear and flight had taught me to seek the nearest exit. The woman came back to the living room with a tall glass of port wine. "Do you drink in the morning?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I said. She gave me the glass and filled another for herself. A man stirred in one of the bedrooms. "Who is that, honey?" he asked. "We have a visitor," she said. "It's a little Pinoy who looks like a rabbit." She looked at me smiling. "My husband is a Filipino. We edit a small newspaper. We have 2 other Pinoys with us. Where did you come from, and what is your name?" "My real name is Alos," I said, "but my friends call me Carlos." "Now we will call you Carl," she said, pouring more wine into my glass. "You don't look like a farm worker. What have you been doing?" "I have been at many things," I answered. "I am a gambler now. That is, I was yesterday." The bedroom door opened and her husband came into the living room. He limped badly as he came toward me. "My name is Pascual," he said. "I hope my wife didn't get you drunk at this time of day." The woman laughed. "Now, honey," she said. "I was only trying to entertain him." Don't you like to drink with me, Carl? Suddenly, Jose and Gazamen came into the living room. Carlos! Carlos! They reached for my hand. It has been a long time, Jose said. I thought I would never see you again after the accident in Bakersfield. Do you know this little rabbit? The woman asked. He saved my life, Jose said, reaching for the bottle of wine on the table. Here's to a new life, Carlos, Pascual said. Good! That's good! We can all work together. Do you know how to write your name? Sure, I said. Pascual produced his briefcase and gave it to me. From now on, don't part with it unless you part with your life. I could not find words to express my joy. Here was the answer to my confusion. Pascual was a socialist. He was a lawyer by profession, but his talent had found a fuller expression in writing. He was small and semi-paralytic, but versatile and fiery. He had brought his American wife from Chicago to California, a woman almost twice as tall as he. Together, they had started a newspaper in Stockton, appealed to the farm workers, prospered until a rival newspaper drove them to the Santa Maria Valley. They then had gone to San Luis Obispo where, at that time, the Filipino agricultural workers were voiceless and treated like peons. The agricultural workers were beginning to ask for unity but had been barred from established unions. The Filipino workers started an independent union, and Jose was one of its organizers. I was happy to work with him too, and happy also to know that in this feudalistic town, the social awakening of Filipinos in California was taking shape. I carried Pascual's briefcase from store to store, listening to him talk to the storekeepers. The responsibilities of a Filipino editor were enormous. Besides editing and soliciting advertisements, he also distributed the paper and campaigned for subscriptions. I was learning fast and remembering, and soon I tried writing news items. Pascual recast what I wrote, but urged me to write more. You have the idea, he said, but you need practice. You have the chance to practice on this paper. I wrote more, but the news items became lengthy articles, mostly expressing my personal reactions. That's it, Carl, Pascual would shout, storming around the room. Write your guts out! Write with thunder and blood! I wrote about blood and conspiracies in the pea fields. Once when urged to write a headline story, I sat down and composed this title, Murder over California. Pascual danced with glee around the room, drinking wine, shouting, Let's fight them with our bare fists, Carl! Fight against the world! I knew that something fatal was happening to him, making him hysterical and irrational. Then one day, he suffered a stroke, and his legs became completely paralyzed. It was the end of his thunder and blood. Jose and I took over the editorial work. Gazamen and Pascual's wife were the business managers. It was a difficult job. I did not really know how to write. I stammered when I tried to solicit advertisements. I was starving again. But my determination to write was indomitable. I pounded my head with my fists when I found that I could not write what was in my mind. I knew even then that it was not natural for a man to hate himself or to be afraid of himself. It was not natural indeed to run from goodness and beauty, which I had done so many times. It was not natural for him. It was not natural for him to be cruel and without compassion. I had come to the crossroads of my life, but there was yet time to find my way. I was fortunate to find in Jose something that I called dignity, and in Pascual, at least in part, a passion for abstract, universal ideas. One day, Jose and I went to Pismo Beach to solicit advertisements. He started on one side of the street and I on the other. It was a bad season, Only a few vacationists had come to the town and the storekeepers could not afford to pay for a space in our paper. The gamblers and prostitutes on the other side of town patronized only the Japanese stores. I sold space to a man who kept a liquor store, and for pay received a quart bottle of whiskey. I was coming out of his place when Jose whistled to me. I looked across the street and saw him with a Japanese girl. He was smiling. I crossed the street hurriedly. "Meet Chie, Carl," he said, putting his arm around her. "Who is she?" I asked in Filipino. "She is a waitress at that cafe across the street," Jose said. "But she is ours now. Let's go, Chie." "We don't have any money," I said in English. "I have money," Chie said. "I have a car too." "You have?" Jose said. "Go get it, Chie." She crossed the street and disappeared in an alley. She came out driving a car, and we jumped in, laughing and drinking from my bottle. We drove toward San Luis Obispo, looking at the blue sea and the heavy peas on the hills on both sides of the highway. Jose threw the empty bottle on the highway. It made a tinkling noise on the hard shoulder of the road. Suddenly, Chia turned to the left and drove madly toward Avila Beach where, she said, we could buy more whiskey. I bought 3 bottles and Chia rented some fishing tackle. We sat on a rock near the water. I threw the line into the water. Chia leaned on my shoulder and went to sleep. I looked at Jose. He too was sleeping, the empty bottle rolling near his head. When they woke up, we improvised a stove and broiled the fish I had caught. Then, in the evening, we rented a cabin under the trees. The night was warm and a breeze came into the room. The stars shone between the trees. It was like a long time ago in a land far away. Was it in Bangusmana that I had seen this same sky? And that lone star, had I seen it among the pine trees in Baguio? Chia slept warmly between us, her legs bare and white. Shadows were moving on her body. I knelt beside her, feeling the world sinking slowly under me. After a while, she got up and began crying. "What are you moaning about?" Jose asked. "I've got to go back to Pismo Beach," Chia said. "My husband is waiting for me." "You told me you had no husband," I said. "Oh, hell," Jose said. I went to the car. Chia was laughing when we reached the highway. Jose and I jumped out and walked to San Luis Obispo. It was morning when we arrived at the house. Pascual's wife met us at the door. "The pea pickers are striking in Pismo Beach," she said. I went to the kitchen where Gazamen was finishing a placard for the strikers. Jose told him to hurry and went out to the car. Pascual's wife, Lucille, sat at the wheel. I jumped in after Gazamen. There were about 100 workers who had refused to strike. In Pismo Beach, while the meeting was going on with Jose as chairman, I went to the back room of a pool room and started preparing a leaflet. I sent Gazamen to an American farmer, a sympathizer, to borrow his mimeograph machine. Then Lucille came and made the stencil, leaving with Gazamen when the meeting was over. Jose entered the room with several strikers. He gave them a few sheets of the leaflet to distribute to the men. Then he took the handle of the mimeograph machine and told me to go out and ask the gambling proprietors to close their businesses for the duration of the strike. When I returned to the pool room, a man told me that Jose had been arrested and taken away. I borrowed a car and drove back to San Luis Obispo. I told Pascual of Jose's arrest. "There is only one thing to do," he said. "Contact Santa Barbara." Lucille called an organization in Santa Barbara and explained the strike and Jose's arrest. In the morning, a man came, and when he went to the county jail, Jose was released. I was sitting in the courtyard when he came out. The man from Santa Barbara shook hands with him and left. Jose sat beside me on the green lawn. "I know what is in your mind, Carl," he said. "It's hard for me to explain to you. It is a long story. This is a war between labor and capital. To our people, however, it is something else. It is an assertion of our right to be human beings again, Carl. But in order for you to understand what this struggle means to me, I'll begin from the beginning of my life in the United States. He began to tell me the story of his life, which was similar to mine. Chapter 25. Pascual's condition was getting worse each day. His only desire now was to go back to the Philippines. His legs were paralyzed, but he could still move his hands. I knew that it was the end for him, but he had served his purpose. He belonged to yesterday. And although his socialistic ideas were vague and fumbling, I gained something vital from him. I was to add something new to it, a new significance and meaning. As Pascual's days came to a close, I went to the Filipino camps and asked for contributions. Some of the agricultural workers came to town and sat around Pascual. He was dying and he wanted to say something. He turned his face toward me and began to speak. "It is for the workers that we must write," he said weakly. "We must interpret their hopes as a people desiring the fullest fulfillment of their potentialities. We must be strong of voice, objective of criticism, protest and challenge. There is no other way to combat any attempts to suppress the individual liberty." It was Pascual's last message. When he died, his wife went to San Francisco with the newspaper and resumed its publication there with the cooperation of a farm worker who had become an editor. I never saw her again. When the house was closed, I took a bus for Los Angeles. I found that my brother Macario and Nick, Jose's brother, were living together. They had started a literary magazine with a man named Felix Razon. To my amazement, he was the same peasant boy who had warned me to leave the rice fields in Tayug before the Colorum revolted against the landlords. I was becoming aware of the dynamic social struggle in America. We talked all night in my brother's room, planning how to spread progressive ideas among the Filipinos in California. Macario had become more serious. When he talked, I noticed his old gentleness and the kind voice that had rung with sincerity at my sickbed in Binalonan. His words seized my imagination, so that years afterward, I am able to write them almost word for word. "It has fallen upon us to inspire a united front among our people," he said. "We must win the backward elements over to our camp, but we must also destroy that which is corrupt among ourselves. These are the fundamentals of our time, but there are also the realities that we must grasp in full. We must achieve articulation of social ideas, not only for some kind of economic security, but also to help culture boom as it should in our time. We are approaching what will be the greatest achievement of our generation, the discovery of a new vista of literature, that is, to speak to the people and to be understood by them. We must look for the mainspring of democracy, but we must also destroy false ideas. We must discover the origin of our freedom and write of it in broad national terms. We must interpret history in terms of liberty. We must advocate democratic ideas and fight all forces that would abort our culture. This is the greatest responsibility of literature, to find in our struggle that which has a future. Literature is a living and growing thing. We must destroy that which is dying, because it does not die by itself. We in America understand the many imperfections of democracy and the malignant disease corroding its very heart. We must be united in the effort to make an America in which our people can find happiness. It is a great wrong that anyone in America, whether he be brown or white, should be illiterate or hungry or miserable. We must live in America where there is freedom for all, regardless of color, station, and beliefs. Great Americans worked with unselfish devotion toward one goal, that is, to use the power of the myriad peoples in the service of America's freedom. They made it their guiding principle. In this, we are the same. We must also fight for an America where a man should be given unconditional opportunities to cultivate his potentialities and to restore him to his rightful dignity. It is but fair to say that America is not a land of one race or one class of men. We are all Americans that have toiled and suffered and known oppression and defeat from the first Indian that offered peace in Manhattan to the last Filipino pea pickers. America is not bound by geographical latitudes. America is not merely a land or an institution. America is in the hearts of men that died for freedom. It is also in the eyes of men that are building a new world. America is a prophecy of a new society of men, of a system that knows no sorrow or strife or suffering. America is a warning to those who would try to falsify the ideals of free men. America is also the nameless foreigner, the homeless refugee, the hungry boy begging for a job, and the black body dangling on a tree. America is the illiterate immigrant who is ashamed that the world of books and intellectual opportunities is closed to him. We are all that nameless foreigner, that homeless refugee, that hungry boy, that illiterate immigrant, and that lynched black body. All of us, from the first Adams to the last Filipino, native-born or alien, educated or illiterate. We are America. The old world is dying, but a new world is being born. It generates inspiration from the chaos that beats upon us all. The false grandeur and security, the unfulfilled promises and illusory power, the number of the dead and those about to die will charge the forces of our courage and determination. The old world will die so that the new world will be born with less sacrifice and agony on the living.